The night was quiet, too quiet. A soft wind moved through the trees around the small farm. The young man, Daniel, sat near the fire outside his wooden house, listening to the sounds of the forest. Usually, he could hear owls, insects, and sometimes the rustle of deer moving through the grass. But tonight, the silence felt heavy, like the world was waiting for something. Daniel was used to being alone. He had built this life with his own hands. During the day, he worked on the farm, and at night he guarded it. Wolves and other animals sometimes came too close, so he had set traps around the edges of his land. It was his routine, nothing unusual, nothing strange. But this night, everything changed. As Daniel looked at the sky, he saw something unusual. At first, it looked like a star moving too quickly. Then it grew brighter, glowing with a strange blue and silver light. It streaked across the dark sky like fire, leaving a long tail behind. He stood up, his heart racing. He thought maybe it was a shooting star, but it was moving lower, much lower. The ground began to shake, and a deep rumble filled the air. The animals in the forest cried out in fear, and some ran past his farm, escaping into the distance. Daniel grabbed his lantern and axe, unsure what was happening. The light fell behind the forest, not too far from his traps. A sudden crash echoed through the night, followed by the smell of smoke and burning metal. Daniel's hands shook, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He stepped carefully into the dark forest, following the smoke. Every step he took made him more nervous, yet more determined to see what had fallen from the sky. The deeper he went, the darker it became. The lantern's flame flickered, casting strange shadows between the trees. Then, he heard something. A low hum, like a machine struggling to stay alive. It was not the sound of anyone's hall. Imal. He moved faster, branches snapping under his boots, until he reached the place where one of his traps was set. Daniel froze. The trap was not empty. Something was caught inside, something he had never seen before. It was not a deer, not a wolf, not any creature of the forest. The figure was human-shaped, but different. The body glowed faintly under the moonlight, the skin smooth like glass, reflecting silver and blue. Long hair shimmered as if it held its own light, and the eyes, large, shining like stars, looked at him with terror. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He almost dropped the lantern. The figure was a woman, but not a woman from Earth. She struggled in the trap, whispering words he could not understand. Her voice was soft, but filled with fear. She pulled against the metal, her movements desperate, her glowing hands trying to break free. But she was weak. The trap had cut into her skin, and from the wound came not red blood, but silver liquid that sparkled as it touched the ground. Daniel stepped back, his mind racing. Was this real or was he dreaming? He wanted to run, but his legs would not move. The alien woman lifted her eyes toward him, her lips trembling, and then, in broken English, she whispered, "Please, don't hurt me." The forest around them was still silent, but the silence now felt alive. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, louder than the hum in the air. He realized this was not just a strange night. This was the beginning of something far bigger than he could ever imagine. And in that moment, standing in the dark forest, staring at the glowing alien caught in his trap, Daniel understood one thing. His life would never be the same again. Daniel stood frozen, the lantern shaking slightly in his hand. The strange woman's glowing eyes were wide with fear, her lips trembling as she whispered again, "Don't hurt me." The words were broken, heavy with an accent, but he understood enough. This creature, this alien, was afraid of him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the wind stopped, and even the distant cries of animals had faded. Daniel felt as if the world had narrowed down to this one moment, this one being trapped before him. He had caught many things in his traps before, wolves, foxes, even a wild boar, but never a person, never anything like her. She looked human, but not completely. Her skin glowed faintly under the moonlight, almost like it was alive. Her long silver hair fell over her face, shining like threads of light. The trap's sharp edges had cut her ankle, and the strange silver blood still glistened. Daniel took a step closer, and immediately she flinched, pulling back as much as the trap allowed. Her breathing grew fast, her eyes darting left and right like a cornered animal. Daniel raised his free hand slowly, trying to show he meant no harm. "It's okay," he whispered, though he doubted she understood. Still, she stopped struggling for a moment, watching him carefully. The lantern light flickered between them, casting shadows on the trees. Daniel's heart pounded louder than the crackling flame. He crouched down beside the trap, studying it. The metal teeth had locked tightly around her ankle. She would not escape without help, but if he released her, what then? Was she dangerous? Could she kill him the moment she was free? The questions circled in his mind, but then he looked at her face again. There was no anger, no hatred, only fear. Gently, Daniel reached for the trap. The alien woman tensed, her glowing fingers curling as if ready to defend herself. But Daniel spoke again, slowly. "I won't hurt you." He pushed the trap's lever, the metal jaws creaked, and finally opened with a harsh sound. She gasped, stumbling forward, collapsing onto the ground, free but weak. For a moment she stayed there, breathing hard, one hand pressed to her injured ankle. Daniel stepped back, giving her space. She looked up at him, confusion in her glowing eyes. Why had he freed her, she seemed to wonder. She tried to stand, but her leg gave out and she fell again. Daniel moved quickly, catching her before she hit the ground. Her body felt light, almost too light, as if she was not fully bound by Earth's gravity. She stared at him, her face inches from his, her silver hair brushing his arm. Daniel felt a strange energy, not just from her glowing skin, but from her presence. It was as if she carried the weight of another world. She pulled away slightly, whispering words he could not understand, then tried again. "Why? Help." Daniel swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. He could have said many things, that he was curious, that he was afraid, that he simply didn't want to see her suffer. But the only word that left his lips was, "because." She blinked, confused but calmer. Daniel took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. The night air was cold, and though she seemed not entirely human, she still shivered. She touched the fabric, studying it as though it was something strange, yet comforting. Her glowing eyes softened, no longer wild with fear. For the first time, she looked at him without shrinking away. The silence of the forest returned, but now it was broken by a distant sound, a low humming, mechanical and steady, carried through the trees. The alien woman's expression changed instantly. Fear returned to her face, stronger than before. She looked toward the sky, then back at Daniel, and whispered in panic. "They come." Daniel frowned, scanning the forest. "What do you mean?" he asked. She shook her head quickly, struggling to find words. "Soldiers. Hunters. They find me." Her voice cracked, and her glowing hand gripped his arm, begging for protection. Daniel's chest tightened. It was clear she was running from something, not just lost, but hunted. And now, by freeing her, he had placed himself in the middle of her danger. The humming sound grew louder, echoing through the dark forest. Lights flickered between the trees in the distance, not lanterns, not fire, but beams of white and red sweeping across the ground. Machines were searching, voices mechanical and cold calling in an unknown language. The alien woman pressed closer to Daniel, her glowing eyes wide. She whispered one final word, heavy with dread. "Hide." And at that moment, Daniel realized the night was no longer strange. It had become deadly. Daniel's breath came fast as the strange lights moved closer through the trees. The alien woman clutched his arm, her silver blood still glowing faintly where the trap had cut her. Her eyes, wide and frightened, searched his face as if begging him to understand. "Hide," she whispered again, her voice trembling. Daniel had no idea who they were, but the fear in her voice was enough. He quickly blew out his lantern, plunging them into darkness. Only her faint glow lit the space between them, casting soft silver shadows on the forest floor. He pulled her behind a cluster of thick bushes, crouching low. The sound of humming machines grew louder, deeper, until it rattled in his chest. Daniel's heart pounded. The woman's breath was unsteady, but she tried to stay quiet. Through the branches, he saw beams of red and white scanning the trees, moving back and forth. Figures moved with the lights. Tall, armored shapes, not human, not animal. Their voices were harsh, metallic, speaking Oz, in a language Daniel could not understand. One of the beams swept close, and for a moment Daniel thought they were caught. The alien woman squeezed his hand tightly, her glowing fingers trembling, but the beam moved away, passing over the trees. The machines continued their search deeper into the forest, their voices fading. For now, they were safe. Daniel turned to her, whispering, "Who are they?" She hesitated, her eyes lowering. Finally, in broken English, she said, "Hunters. Soldiers. They take me back. They kill." The words sent a chill through Daniel's spine. He wanted to ask more, but her face told him the truth. These soldiers were dangerous, and she was running from them. Slowly, Daniel pulled out a cloth from his pocket. He reached for her ankle, and she flinched, pulling back. Her fear was sharp, like she expected him to harm her. Daniel shook his head, speaking gently. "I want to help." He held up the cloth, showing her, then carefully wrapped it around her wound. She watched every movement, tense at first, then slowly relaxing. The silver blood stopped dripping, and her breathing steadied. When he finished, she looked at him with wide eyes, her voice soft, unsure. "Why? You help." Daniel thought about it, then shrugged. "Because you needed me." The words were simple, but they seemed to mean something to her. Her lips trembled, as if she wanted to say more, but no words came. They sat in silence for a moment, hidden among the trees. Daniel studied her face, the way her glowing skin caught the faint moonlight. She did not look like a monster, not like a threat. She looked tired, scared, and strangely human. Her eyes, though shining, held the same fear and hope he had seen in people before. Finally, she whispered her name, the sound soft and almost musical. "Leora." Daniel repeated it carefully. "Leora." She nodded, her lips curling into the smallest smile. Lee, for the first time, her fear seemed to fade, even if only a little. But then the silence broke again. The machines' voices carried faintly through the forest, reminding them that danger was still near. Daniel knew they could not stay here. He pointed back toward his farm, whispering, "Come with me. Safe place." Leora hesitated, glancing toward the lights, then back at him. Finally, she nodded, trusting him. They moved quietly through the forest, Daniel leading the way, Leora limping behind him. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made Daniel tense. He kept glancing back to make sure she was still there, her faint glow guiding him in the dark. At last, the outline of his small wooden house appeared between the trees. They hurried across the field and slipped into the barn, closing the door softly behind them. Inside, the air smelled of hay and earth. Daniel guided her to a corner, helping her sit on a pile of straw. She sighed, exhausted, leaning back against the wooden wall. Her glowing eyes studied the barn, curious but calm. For the first time since he had seen her, she no longer looked ready to run. Daniel knelt in front of her, his voice low. "You can stay here, safe." Leora looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Finally, she whispered, "Trust," and placed her glowing hand gently on his chest. The warmth of her touch spread through him, not just physical, but something deeper. It felt like a bond, a fragile bridge between two worlds. Daniel nodded, his own heart steadying. He realized this night was not only about fear, it was about trust. Trust between a human and an alien who had every reason to fear each other. And in that moment, hidden in the quiet barn, Daniel understood that whatever came next, they were no longer alone. The barn was dark and silent. Only the faint glow of Leora's skin lit the shadows. Daniel sat on an old wooden stool, watching her as she rested. Her breathing was calm, her eyes half closed, but the fear had not left her face. Every so often, she would glance toward the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Outside, the night had grown colder. The forest that usually felt peaceful now seemed alive with danger. Daniel could still hear the faint hum of machines in the distance, like a storm that refused to pass. He wondered who these hunters were and why they wanted her so badly. His mind wrestled with questions, but deep inside, one truth became clear. He had chosen to protect her, and there was no turning back. Leora stirred, sitting up straighter, her glowing eyes fixed on him, filled with both fear and determination. "No, stop," she said softly, her words broken but sharp with meaning. "They search. They find me." Daniel leaned closer, whispering, "Why? Why do they want you?" Her gaze lowered, her hands twisting together as if holding something invisible. Finally, she whispered, "I, not soldier. I, scientist." The word hung heavy in the barn. She looked at him, searching for understanding. "I make machines, not for war, for life, for heal," she said slowly, her English rough but clear enough. "But leaders, they want weapon. I say no, I escape." Her eyes filled with sorrow, glowing softly as she continued. "Now they hunt, they kill me. and all who helped me." Daniel felt the weight of her words sink deep into his chest. So she was not just an alien, she was a fugitive, hunted by her own people. And now, by saving her, he had painted a target on himself too. He took a deep breath, steadying his voice. "You're safe here. I'll protect you." Her eyes widened, shining with something more than fear, something close to hope. But the moment was shattered by a sound outside. The barn walls trembled with the vibration of engines. Red lights swept across the cracks in the wood, slicing through the darkness. Leora's body stiffened, her glowing hand reaching for Daniel's arm. "They here," she whispered in terror. "Hunters here." Daniel moved quickly, grabbing an old rifle that leaned against the wall. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. He motioned for her to stay low, then crept toward the barn door. Through a thin gap, he saw them, figures in dark armor, tall and menacing, their movements sharp and precise. Strange symbols glowed on their chest plates, and their eyes burned red through their helmets. They carried weapons unlike anything Daniel had seen, humming with dangerous energy. A metallic voice echoed across the field, harsh and cold. "Surrender the fugitive." The sound made Daniel's skin crawl. He glanced back at Leora, who shook her head fiercely, her glowing eyes full of panic. "No surrender," she whispered. "They kill." The soldiers spread out, scanning the ground with their lights. Every step they took made the earth seem to tremble. Daniel's mind raced. He had faced wolves, storms, and hunger, but this was something beyond his world. Still, he could not let them take her, not after she had trusted him, not after she had told him her truth. He looked around the barn, his eyes landing on the old tools, ropes, and lanterns. Traps, he thought. He had always used traps to survive, and maybe, just maybe, they could help him now. He grabbed what he could, chains, hooks, and a bucket of oil, and began to set them quickly, his hands moving with the skill of someone used to survival. Leora watched him, her face pale with fear, but also wonder. "You fight," she whispered. Daniel gave a small nod, his voice firm. "I fight. I protect." Her glowing lips formed the faintest smile, as if she could not believe a human would stand against her hunters. The barn door suddenly shook, a heavy fist pounding against it. Another metallic voice rang out. "Last warning. Surrender the fugitive or be destroyed." Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle, his traps ready, his heart steady. He looked back at Leora one more time, her silver hair glowing faintly in the shadows. "Stay down," he whispered. Then he turned to face the door. The wooden beams groaned under the force of the soldiers outside. Any moment, they would break through. Daniel braced himself, sweat dripping down his brow, his breath sharp. This was no longer just about survival. This was about defiance, about standing between a hunted alien woman and the hunters who wanted to destroy her. And as the barn doors cracked under the soldiers' assault, Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. The night of fear was over. Now the fight had begun. The barn doors rattled, each strike from outside shaking the wooden frame. Dust fell from the beams, and the animals inside stirred nervously, sensing the danger. Daniel stood tall with the rifle in his hands, his traps laid across the floor like silent guards. Behind him, Leora crouched low, her glowing eyes locked on him, fear and trust mixing in their shine. The wood finally cracked, splinters flying. A heavy armored boot forced the door open, and red light spilled into the barn. 3 soldiers stepped inside, their armor gleaming, their weapons humming with power. Their voices were cold, metallic. "Surrender the fugitive." Daniel's heart hammered, but he did not move aside. The first soldier stepped forward, scanning the shadows. Suddenly his foot struck a hidden rope. The trap snapped shut, sending a heavy beam swinging down from the ceiling. It crashed into the soldier's helmet with a loud crack, knocking him to the ground. The barn echoed with a sound. The other soldiers turned quickly, raising their weapons. Daniel fired, the old rifle roaring. The shot struck one soldier's chest plate, staggering him back, though not breaking the armor. The third soldier aimed at Daniel, but before he could fire, the ground gave way beneath him. Daniel's hidden pit trap sent the soldier crashing into the dirt, his weapon clattering away. For a moment, silence filled the barn again, broken only by the hum of weapons and the ragged sound of Daniel's breathing. But the soldiers were not finished. The one with the chest plate dented by Daniel's shot growled through his mechanical voice, stepping forward with heavy rage. He raised his weapon toward Daniel, the red light glowing brighter, and then Leora moved. She lifted her glowing hands, energy sparking between her fingers like living light. A burst of silver power shot from her palms, striking the soldier and throwing him back against the barn wall. The wood cracked, sparks flew, and the soldier collapsed, stunned. Daniel turned to her, wide-eyed. She panted, her hands trembling from the effort, her glow flickering. Not fighter, she whispered, but I try. Daniel gave a quick nod, his voice low but firm. You did more than try. You saved us. They dragged the fallen soldier into the shadows, hiding him beneath hay. The others outside would return, Daniel knew that much. But for now, they had won a small piece of time, a small victory. Leora sat down heavily on the straw, her breathing uneven. Daniel knelt beside her, checking the cloth around her wounded ankle. It was stained with silver blood, but the bleeding had slowed. She looked at him with tired eyes, whispering, "Why risk your life for me?" Daniel hesitated, then said softly, "Because no one deserves to be hunted for wanting peace." The words came from deep inside him, honest and heavy with meaning. Leora studied him, her glowing eyes softening. Slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. Her touch was warm, almost electric, as if she carried a living current inside her. For a moment, the danger outside faded. There was only silence between them, a silence filled with something fragile and powerful. A bond was forming, not of blood or world, but of choice. She had chosen to trust him, and he had chosen to protect her. That choice tied them together more strongly than fear ever could. Daniel sat back, his eyes scanning the barn again. The hunters would not stop. He knew it. They would return in greater numbers, with stronger weapons. But looking at Leora, at the faint glow that surrounded her like a second skin, he felt a strange courage. He was only a man, a farmer. Yet in her eyes he saw something greater. She believed in him, and that belief lit a fire inside him stronger than fear. Leora broke the silence, her voice soft. "In my world, no one help, no one stand, only obey." Her lips trembled as she added, "But you, human, you stand." Daniel gave a faint smile, though his heart was heavy. "Sometimes standing is all we can do." Her eyes glistened, and she nodded slowly, as if she understood. Outside, the mechanical voices rose again, closer this time. The glow of red lights returned, sweeping across the farm. Daniel stood, gripping his rifle, readying himself. Leora struggled to her feet, leaning on the wall, her glow brighter than before. Together, they stood side by side in the barn's shadows, waiting for the next wave. In that moment, Daniel realized this fight was no longer about survival alone. It was about loyalty, about courage, about the bond he had forged with a woman from the stars, and no matter what came next, he knew he would not break it. The night outside the barn had grown louder, engines rumbled like thunder, and red beams of light swept across the fields. The hunters had returned, more of them this time, their voices sharp and mechanical, echoing in the cold air. Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle, his eyes narrowing as he listened to their movements. Beside him, Leora stood weak but glowing brighter, as if her fear only made her shine more. The barn shook with each step of the soldiers outside, their shadows stretched long against the wooden walls, their armor clanking like iron beasts. Daniel's traps had bought them time before, but now, with so many enemies the barn would not hold. He turned to Leora, his voice low but steady. "We can't stay. We have to move." She looked at him with wide eyes, uncertain. "Where?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel pointed toward the forest, toward the place where the strange light had crashed the night before. "Your ship, it's still there, isn't it?" Leora nodded slowly, her glow flickering. "Yes, but broken. Need fix." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we'll fix it, or we'll die trying." The barn doors shook again, this time with a heavy blast that sent dust raining down. The hunters were preparing to break in, their weapons charging, the hum filling the air like a swarm of bees. Daniel grabbed Leora's arm, pulling her toward the back of the barn. There was a small hatch he used to move supplies in and out, just big enough for them to crawl through. "Go," he whispered, motioning for her. Leora hesitated, looking back at the doors, then at him. Her glowing hand brushed his cheek gently, her voice soft. "If they catch, you die." Daniel gave a faint, grim smile. Then I guess we better not get caught. She slipped through the hatch first, her silver glow lighting the grass outside. Daniel followed quickly, dragging his rifle with him. They crouched Layawas. Ow! Moving across the field, the cold night air biting at their skin. Behind them, the barn doors finally gave way with a deafening crash. The hunters stormed inside, their voices rising in anger as they found the place empty. Daniel and Lyora moved into the forest, the trees swallowing them in darkness. But the hunters were quick, their beams of red and white cutting through the woods. The ground shook as machines followed, heavy and relentless. Lyora limped, her injured ankle slowing her, but she pushed on, determination shining in her eyes. Daniel supported her, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, guiding her forward. The hum of weapons grew closer, the beams sweeping just behind them. Daniel's chest burned with every breath, but he kept moving. Finally, through the trees, they saw it. The crash site. The small alien ship lay broken among the roots, its metal twisted, smoke still rising faintly from its hull. Strange symbols glowed weakly along its surface, fading like dying stars. Lyora stumbled toward it, her glowing hands brushing the ship's side. She whispered words in her own language, and the ship responded with a low hum, lights flickering weakly. Daniel stood guard, his rifle aimed at the forest, listening for movement. Every sound made his pulse race. Every shadow felt alive. They close, Lyora whispered, her eyes full of fear. Daniel glanced at her. Can you fix it? She shook her head quickly. Need time, need focus. Daniel nodded firmly. Then I'll give you time. The hunters' voices drew nearer, their red beams slicing through the trees. Daniel moved fast, setting what few traps he had left. Ropes tied between trees, oil splashed on the ground, branches sharpened into spikes. It was not much, but it was all he had. He took his place between the ship and the hunters, his heart steady now. Behind him, Lyora knelt by the ship, her glowing hands pressing against its broken panels, sparks of silver energy flowing into the metal. The first hunter stepped into the clearing, his red eyes locking onto Daniel. Daniel fired, the rifle's echo booming across the night. The bullet struck the hunter's chest, staggering him back. But more came behind him, their weapons glowing. Daniel shouted, his voice strong. You want her? You go through me. The clearing erupted in chaos. Traps snapped, flames from the oil roared, shadows danced in the firelight. Hunters stumbled, machines sparked, but still they advanced. Daniel fought with everything he had, his rifle, his axe, even his fists. Pain shot through his body, but he refused to fall. Behind him, Lyora cried out, her energy pouring into the ship. The hull glowed brighter, the hum rising like a heartbeat returning to life. The ship's lights flickered, stronger now, its engines coughing awake, but time was running out. The hunters closed in, surrounding them, their weapons raised. Daniel stood bleeding, exhausted but unbroken. Lyora looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with both sorrow and admiration. She whispered, Human, why you fight so hard? Daniel gritted his teeth, because you're worth it. The ship roared, a surge of silver light bursting from its core. The hunters staggered back, shielding their eyes. Daniel turned, seeing the ship alive again, glowing with power. Lyora reached out her hand toward him, her voice strong now. Come, we escape. The clearing burned with light and fire. Daniel stood bleeding, his shirt torn, his body weak, but his eyes fierce. Around him, the hunters moved closer, their weapons glowing red, their voices cold and sharp. Behind him, Lyora's ship hummed louder, its silver glow spreading across the trees like dawn. It was alive again, ready to fly, but it needed more time. Daniel's hand shook as he lifted his rifle once more. He was just a man, standing against soldiers from another world, but he refused to step aside. His voice broke the night, strong despite his pain. If you want her, you'll have to kill me first. The hunters paused, their red eyes fixed on him. For a moment, the forest seemed frozen, every tree, every shadow holding its breath. Then one soldier raised his weapon, the hum of energy filling the air. Daniel braced himself, his heart steady, his choice made. Before the shot could fire, Lyora cried out. A burst of silver light erupted from her hands, striking the ground between Daniel and the hunters. The blast shook the earth, sparks flying into the trees. The hunters staggered back, their armor glowing from the impact. Daniel turned to her, wide-eyed. She stood with her glow blazing brighter than ever. her silver hair floating as if lifted by the light itself. Her voice rang strong, no longer trembling. "I will not go with you." The hunters roared in their metallic language, raising their weapons again, but Daniel stepped in front of her, blocking their aim. Even against her power, even against their weapons, he stood like a shield. Lyora's glowing eyes filled with something new. Admiration. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Human. Stronger than I thought." Daniel gritted his teeth, sweat and blood dripping. "I'm not strong, I'm just stubborn." But in that stubbornness was something greater, something that the hunters could not understand. The fight raged on, the hunters advancing, Daniel striking back with fire and traps, Lyora feeding more of her energy into the ship, its hum rising higher and higher. The ground shook as its engines roared to life, sending waves of heat across the clearing. The hunters fired, beams of red cutting through the smoke. One struck near Daniel, throwing him back onto the ground. Pain seared through his side, his breath ragged. He struggled to rise, his hands pushing against the dirt. Above him, the hunters closed in, weapons ready. But before they could strike, the ship's glow erupted, blinding them all. Silver light flooded the clearing, pushing back the shadows. Daniel felt a hand grab his own, warm and glowing. He looked up to see Lyora, her eyes bright with determination. "Come," she whispered, pulling him toward the ship. Daniel staggered to his feet, leaning on her for strength. Together they climbed into the ship as the hunters fired wildly, their beams bouncing off the rising shield of silver light. Inside, the ship pulsed with energy, the controls glowing under Lyora's touch. Daniel fell into a seat, his body weak, his eyes heavy. Through the glass, he saw the hunters running, shouting, firing, but none could reach them. The engines roared, the ground trembled, and then the ship lifted, rising above the forest. The earth fell away beneath them, the night sky stretching wide and endless. Daniel pressed his hand against the glass, watching the hunters grow smaller and smaller. He had never been so close to the stars, and yet somehow he felt more human than ever. Beside him, Lyora looked at him with glowing eyes, filled with gratitude and something more. "You fight for me," she whispered softly. Daniel nodded weakly. "Someone had to." She placed her glowing hand over his, her voice trembling with emotion. "In my world, no one fights without order, no one stands without command, but you fight because it is right." Daniel gave a faint smile, his voice rough but steady. "That's what it means to be human." The ship soared higher, breaking through the clouds, the stars shining brighter than ever. Daniel closed his eyes, exhausted but alive. Lyora turned to him, her voice soft but strong. "I will never forget this. Never forget you." How her words carried the weight of a promise, a bond that stretched beyond worlds. As the ship climbed into the sky, Daniel opened his eyes one last time. He looked at her, at the stars, and whispered, "Come back someday." She smiled, her glow soft and warm. "I will." The night on Earth grew quiet again as the ship vanished into the stars. The hunters left behind, defeated and broken, scattered in the forest. And Daniel, though battered and scarred, knew in his heart that he had changed something, not just for himself, not just for Lyora, but for what it meant to be human. Because sometimes, humanity was not about strength, not about power. It was about the choice to stand, even when standing seemed impossible. And that choice had made all the difference.